guys, we're here today to rank every single poison type in competitive Pokemon. And if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, leave a like below and subscribe. I know a lot of you guys seem to enjoy this type of content, so I would love to see down below what tier list you want to see next. I'm probably going to be doing normal next. However, if you have another type or even just something at all you want to see tiered, comment down below and I can cover it for the week after normal. But with that said, let's break down really quickly what the different tiers are because I get the question every time, how is this tier list being done? So, as I usually end up mentioning, for anyone new to the tier list, we do have the different tiers S plus to F rank. The S plus tier is for Pokemon that are either really top tier in VGC, or for Pokemon that dominate tiers such as Nadex Anything Goes, Sword and Shield Anything Goes, or for Sword and Shield Ubers. These are the Pokemon that are typically dominating the box art allowed tiers, so I want to cover those Pokemon in here, even if they're not necessarily box arts. For example, obviously Incineroar is one of the best VGC Pokemon, it literally defines tier, so this would be an S plus Pokemon, regardless of the fact that it's not really that great in singles. So I do want to make that very clear. This is accounting for both singles and doubles, because I don't want to just ignore something that might be one of the best Pokemon of all time in VGC, but it might not be terrible in Sword and Shield singles either, it's just not a dominating Pokemon. The S tier Pokemon are the Pokemon that are still very good in VGC, they're still very good in Sword and Shield Ubers, Nadex, AG, etc. But they're not necessarily meta definers. This would be like your Rayquaza in Ubers, for example. It's still really good. And this also accounts for Pokemon that are like top 3, 5 in OU. You know, the Pokemon that you see consistently in the S plus range in the OU viability. Stuff like Land of Tea and Heatran, for example, would make up this tier. The A tier Pokemon are still very good Pokemon in competitive. They're just not necessarily defining their tiers, or they're Pokemon that are really bad in Ubers, but only banned there because of some uncompetitive mechanic, or just the fact that they were too overwhelming for OU, but they still have outright 0 place in Ubers. These would be Pokemon, for example, like maybe Cinderace in Ubers, or let's say, for example, we have Ferrothorn in OU, still a very good Pokemon, just not necessarily a top 3 Pokemon. We have B tier, which is for mostly the Pokemon that reside in like the UU tier. Maybe they're barely in OU, but they still exist there. Stuff like that. We have C tier, which is for Pokemon that are mostly in the lower tiers, either bubbling in and out of UU, or maybe they're Pokemon that are decent in RU. D tier is for Pokemon that are typically in the NUPU range, and they're still actually like usable. And F tier is for Pokemon that are either NFEs, but they were noteworthy enough to actually mention, or B, they're for Pokemon that are so bad, but they're fully evolved, so they have to be ranked somewhere. So, with that established, let's go over what the tier list is. We have Venusaur up first. Venusaur is a really good Pokemon. However, unlike something like an Incineroar or a Gmax Charizard, I do actually think that Venusaur isn't necessarily as much of a meta definer. It's just a really good Pokemon, and it benefits from how the meta was already defined. I do still want to acknowledge, though, that Venusaur is still a really good Pokemon, so I'm actually going to put Venusaur in the S tier. Venusaur is one of the better Pokemon you could really use in VGC, and it's mostly because of how good Groudon is usable in VGC. We do, in the same vein, I'm going to actually put Gmax Venusaur in the S plus range, because I think that Gmax Venusaur is a different story. Vinelash is honestly one of the it's by far one of the best Gmax moves you could really use in the entire game, and it's honestly one of the best max moves in general, even including the non-Gmax Pokemon moves. The fact that you can get 4 turns of overtime damage that's going to do 1/6 of the health is honestly incredible, and it's also on top of the fact that you have a really strong stab with it, and Venusaur typically will be on Sun teams, which means it's going to be double speed. So this Pokemon is honestly a menace. I do think that there is an actual tiering difference between the Gmax and the regular. However, at the same time, I do acknowledge that typically on Sun teams, you might also see a Charizard on there, and you might not necessarily want to max Venusaur every game. But when you do max it, it's still going to put in that much work. It's just that Charizard requires the max to be good. Venusaur, as shown here, does not. It's still a good Pokemon. It's just not in the S plus category without its max. As far as regular Mega Venusaur goes, Mega Venusaur is an interesting one. I do think a Mega Venusaur is definitely not a bad Pokemon, but you're not going to see Mega Venusaur competing in the same sort of territory that you're going to see Pokemon like Gmax Venusaur, for example, which is definitely still not bad. It's just not some sort of top tier Pokemon or anything. What would I tier this though? I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what I would tier Mega Venusaur, because Mega Venusaur is a pretty interesting case. It's a Pokemon that's banned from UU at the very least because it was too good in there, but it's not really that great in OU necessarily. I think I'm going to put it in the B tier though. I think Mega Venusaur, as far as Megas go, especially for Poison type Megas, I do think that it has a bit of competition from at least a couple other Pokemon, albeit there's not really anything that's like super obnoxiously better than it besides a single Poison type. But at the very least, it's still not too unique, and it's also a grass type. It's not really a ground resist, which when there's so many ground types that do linger in the Nadex and OU tier, stuff, for example, such as Lano T, Garchomp, Excadrill, you really can't justify having a grass that isn't necessarily going to be like truly resistant to those. It's still a good Pokemon though, I just don't think it's anything insane. Next up we have Nidoqueen though. Nidoqueen I think is honestly a C tier pick, whereas I'm going to put Nidoking, actually I'm going to put Nidoking for poisons also in the C tier, but I'm going to put it ahead. I think as far as poisons go, Nidoking has a bit more competition. Well, actually no, I actually lie. I think as far as poisons go, Nidoking has less competition, same as Nidoqueen. These are two really good poison types. Well, no, I do want to still keep the distinction because at the very least Nidoking in Sword and Shield is definitely the better one. I think you could make a case for BDSP, them being pretty even, or both pretty viable Pokemon, at least proportionally speaking. They're both not bad UU Pokemon, but they're not going to necessarily like tear up some sort of BDSP OU tier or anything. They're just usable. But as far as Sword and Shield goes, I do think that Nidoking is actually the better one personally, in Sword and Shield and Natdex specifically. But with that in mind, Nidoking does favor from the fact that this is a more offensively based generation, but not necessarily like Z-move offensive, where you're going to run a Z-move or you're going to perish. Whereas Nidoqueen is still not a bad Pokemon in RU, and you even see it running modest Life Orb sets because Nidoking has been bubbling in and out of other different tiers. For example, right now, if we were to look at Nidoking and Nidoqueen's tiers, Nidoking is in UU. Because of that, Nidoqueen is pulling off the offensive roles that Nidoking would otherwise be doing in the RU tier. So I do think that because of the fact that Nidoking has been, to a degree, consistently tiered over Nidoqueen, or at best tiered in the same tier this generation, I do want to make that clear on this tier list, so I'm going to put it in the tier above. Though I think you can make a case for either swapping. Really, it's just generation dependent, because last generation, I would argue that Nidoqueen was the better one. With that said though, Beedrill, F tier, terrible. One of the worst poisons we really have in this tier list. I'll just mention that right now. It's so bad. Mega Beedrill though, I can't lie, I think Mega Beedrill is also a B tier Pokemon actually. This is a really good momentum gainer, and it's a really fast pivot. And while I do think it's probably going to be one of the worst Pokemon we do have in the B tier, Mega Beedrill is still an obnoxiously good pivot. It's outpacing Pokemon such as Koko and other 130s, and it can have some not terrible matchups against the other OU Pokemon, albeit it's very niche when doing so. But I definitely do think that you could make a case for Mega Beedrill at least having niche viability, and I use that word very, very loosely. Like, I'm talking like D tier viability in OU. However, I do think it's not a bad Pokemon as far as the UU tier goes. When you think of Pokemon like Mega Beedrill, for example, you're thinking of a really good lower tier pivot that's going to benefit a lot, especially from the fact that typically other Scarfers in these tiers aren't necessarily as viable at outpacing Mega Beedrill. Barring stuff like Infernape, for example, and Terrakion, I think is also in the UU Natdex BL tier, or actually it's even lower, but point being is other fast fighting types are really about it, because a lot of those typically have coverage for B. But point being is that B is a really good pivot, and it's amazing on those offensive builds, so I do actually think that B is still a deserving B Pokemon, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's as good as Mega Venusaur. Arbok is definitely an F tier Pokemon, but it's better than Beedrill. Galar is pretty cool, and coil sets are not terrible, but it's still fucking horseshit. This Pokemon is really not that usable, and I cannot really think of a lot that actually gives Arbok any sort of usage. Is just better than Beedrill. Vileplume's up next, and I gotta give Vileplume a D tier. This is a Pokemon you actually typically do see in like the NU sort of tiering in terms of Smogon. Albeit I'm not gonna act like this is some god tier Pokemon or anything, but it's consistently NU, and it's also not terrible as a Sun pick. Albeit I will say it's objectively speaking outclassed by Venusaur, though early gen when Venusaur was not in the VGC meta, you actually could see some potential after use sets with Vileplume, which were pretty cool. So I gotta give it props. It's not horseshit, it's just not really that great either, but it is usable. It's definitely usable. Venomoth, I'm gonna give Venomoth C tier. This is a pretty cool Pokemon actually, especially in the BDSP tier, albeit it's not something you'd really see in Natdex specifically, but I mean, it's not terrible as far as a low tier Pokemon goes. It's banned from RU currently, actually I think it's banned from RU, which is pretty good to be honest as far as Venomoth's viability goes. It means it's not a really bad Pokemon, and even in that deck specifically, it could benefit from Z-move sets, for example. And in BDSP, it honestly just benefits from the fact that it's a very thin metagame. There's not a lot of Pokemon that really would actually compete with it, but it's still not a bad low tier Pokemon in that tier as well. With that said though, I think the Venomoth benefits a lot from Tinted Lens specifically. It's really the one saving grace for it. But yeah, I think the Venomoth, actually I think that I just realized I was looking at Venomoth's BDSP tiering, I think, when looking at it. No, it's actually RUBL in both tiers. Would you look at that? The point being though is that Venomoth definitely does benefit in the lower tier aspect from being a good Quiver Dance user. It also has Toxic Spikes, which is actually pretty cool as far as a support set, though typically Quiver Dance or Bust is really what you're running here. Next up is Victory Bell. Victory Bell is just a worse Vile Plume in my opinion. It's still not terrible on Sun teams, and it has the cool benefit of having Sucker Punch for outside of Sun. Physical sets are pretty not bad. This also, before Venusaur got Weather Ball and Chlorophyll legally, was really the best sweeper you had that could run both, and I use that very loosely because it was still very bad. It's just the Venusaur couldn't legally run Weather Ball in tandem with Chlorophyll, so it had that niche over it. Now it doesn't really have that, but Victory Bell's not even native to the Sword and Shield decks anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But as far as BDSP goes, it's not terrible. It's just not good. It is objectively though, because the Chlorophyll mon, I do think it, objectively speaking, is better than Arbok and Venusaur. Beedrill, I should say. Not Venusaur. It's definitely not better than Venusaur. The point being though is that Victory Bell's not bad. Next up we have Galar Bro. Galar Bro's a pretty cool mon. I'm actually gonna give this B tier. I'm gonna put it above Beedrill. Galar Slowbro is at the very least a pretty interesting Pokemon actually. This is a Pokemon that has had some very wild usage in Sword and Shield to say the least, hovering between tiers really greatly. I'm pretty sure that Quick Draw is really the thing that actually keeps this afloat, funny enough, which I know a lot of people were saying this Pokemon would be terrible because it's a more offensively based Slowbro and the Regenerator wasn't going to be as useful on it. But I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, Quick Draw was actually the thing that was getting this thing like low tier banned, because of the fact that it could pop on competitive strats. Though it seems like in UU at least it's typically running more so Regenerator sets, though still Quick Draw is the thing. The point being is this is a pretty cool Pokemon actually, and I think it's a lot better than people initially gave it credit for. Though I will say, to be fair, that people also didn't think that Galar Slowking would be that great because of the fact that it was a poison type Slowking, and really the benefit that it had was the fact that it's T-Spike immune, and otherwise it didn't really seem that great on paper. But it's proven to be pretty good. It's just the fact that sadly it is a poison type that cannot Toxic, which is so obnoxious for it. Because why doesn't this Pokemon get Toxic? Both of them don't get Toxic. It's still really terrible. They're poison types. They should have learned it through level up. The point being is they were missed opportunities, but they're still really good Pokemon. Next up though is Muck. Muck is pretty terrible, but it's probably one of the best Pokemon we're going to have in the F tier. It's pretty good Splash Sponge. This actually is one of those few Pokemon that has a poison type that is Spadef enough that could actually soft check Xerneas if you run a Lure Berry on it, which is something, but that's really the only thing I can say positive about this. And even still, you never run this in Ubers. It's horseshit in Ubers. But I had to mention it because it's at least one thing that Muck can do, and it can do it better than those. Also, it's a kind of cool AV Pokemon, and curse sets are not terrible on it either. Alolan Muck, on the other hand, is actually a pretty good Pokemon. We typically would see this in Nat decks, for example, with Pursuit sets on AV build. I'm going to rank it above Mega B. I'm actually going to rank it above Galar Slowbro as well. I don't know if that's really a hot take or not, but it's definitely not a bad Pokemon by any means. The fact that this can trap ghosts really well, and also the fact that this is a really decent AV Sponge. I know it's not necessarily like the highest tier, it's tiered lower than B anyway, but I do think the potential to be viable in OU for this Pokemon, just because the fact that this ends up actually being such a good Spadef Sponge. Actually, no, that's a lie. I'm going to put this below B, but I am going to still put it in the B tier. I think it's still a pretty good Pokemon as far as Spadef Sponging goes, and it's a really good AV Mon. You can typically even see this in other tiers as far as Nat decks, OU or UU. In my personal opinion, it has viability for checking stuff in both tiers. It's a cool niche Pokemon in Ubers as well. However, it is, objectively speaking, niche in those tiers. The point being is it's not bad. Galar Weezing is pretty cool. I'm gonna give this top a C. It's pretty cool in VGC. It's not bad in RU. It's just not great, though it is definitely the better Weezing form for sure. Neutralizing Gas plus Defog combination save this thing as far as singles goes. And Neutralizing Gas with Reggie, this is better than regular Weezing also as a fairy typing, though you can make a case for both, I guess. The point being is this is not bad, and yeah, I think Galar Weezing having Neutralizing Gas honestly is really good for VGC, considering you can negate a lot of abilities at once, stuff like Intimidates, Terrains, Weathers, and it's honestly really amazing, considering the fact that you could stop a lot of team archetypes that benefit off of their lead abilities. So I do think that's pretty cool. However, it's not like meta definer, it's just a decent Pokemon. Well, I should say it's a decent niche Pokemon, I should say. I think that's a better indication of what it's doing. Weezing, on the other hand, I think it's just a worse version of Galar Weezing. However, I think it's better than Victory Bell at the very least. But in singles, it's definitely worse than Vileplume, in my personal opinion. It's still not terrible in VGC, though. So I'm going to give it D tier just between these two. Gengar's going to, weirdly enough, be our first A tier. Nasty Bot sets are pretty good on this. Choice sets are really good on this. This is one of the best Pokemon you can really run in BDSP as well. Especially from the fact that BDSP is like DPPOU, which is balanced with Pursuit to handle Ghost Psychics, but it does not have Pursuit to handle them. makes this Pokemon obnoxious. This is a really good Pokemon with very few actual reliable switch-ins. Focus Blast plus Sludge Bomb plus Shadow Ball and then Nasty Plot makes this absurd as a sweeper. Its 110 speed is pretty hard to actually counter in BDSP as well. This is really, objectively speaking, one of the best Pokemon in the tier. However, at the same time, I do think that its viability in other tiers isn't really that great. It's not a bad Pokemon by any sense. It's no top tier Pokemon. It's not even OU in Nat Dex. It's barely OU in my opinion. If it is OU, which it actually isn't anymore. The point being is it's not OU in any tier besides BDSP, and that's mostly just because of the fact that BDSP had the benefit of having such a limited dex. And similar to why I put Blaziken in the A tier instead of the S tier was because the fact that it wasn't even OU in any other format besides BDSP where it got banned from. I can't justify putting Gengar in the S tier just because it's a really good BDSP OU Pokemon when I put Blaziken in the A tier and it got banned from BDSP OU. So I'm going to put it in A tier. It's still not a bad Pokemon, but when it's only OU tier where it's even like a top 5-10 Pokemon is BDSP, and the other tiers it's not even OU to begin with, I can't really justify putting it in S. Mega Gengar though, S+. This is the best poison we're going to get on this tier, so I'll spoil it right now. It's the best poison type in general of all time. The trapping on Mega Gengar is absurd, and when you compare this with other Uber Pokemon, it becomes obnoxious. The 130 speed is incredible. You can use stout-based stuff like Arceus forms, especially when Fairy is one of the better Arceus forms. And a lot of those Arceus types can't run Shed Chill, so you can pick them off depending on if you weaken them with something else. A lot of teams need to change how they're going to play based on if Mega Gengar is present or not. With stuff like Nasty Plot, this can run mono attack sets with sub Nasty Plot and then like disable or encore and really be obnoxious. Teleport also helps us a lot because you teleport from something really slower or maybe a slow baton pass as far as Nat Dex AG goes, and then pivot into Mega Gengar so we can trap something and kill it off really quickly. This is honestly, in my opinion, one of the best Pokemon of all time, personally, but it's definitely the best poison type on today's list. G-Max Gengar, I can't lie, G-Max Gengar is just a worse Mega Gengar. And I think it's actually not that great. Personally, the fact that you need to pop a max move and it has to be max Ghost, I believe, to actually trap anything, and also the fact that G-Max Gengar isn't that great in really any sort of tier. The max move objectively is a pretty good max move though. I'm gonna put this in the A tier. I'm gonna put it ahead of Gengar, but I only am putting it ahead of Gengar because the fact that I do think, objectively speaking, that the max move is really good and Mega Gengar has a lot of coverage that could take advantage of it, and so like Max Ooze to set up on stuff could still basically pull off a pseudo Mega Gengar. However, I do think the fact that you need to burn a Dynamax is a bit of a cost on this. I think realistically it's going to come down to the fact that if you don't have a better max option, Gengar at the very least isn't a mon you're going to max as a regular Gengar in my opinion, so you may as well just max it as G-Max, and I think it's the logic for why I'm going to tier it here. But it's a really confusing one to say the least. It's just not a great max in comparison to something like a G-Max Venusaur. Tentacruel though, Tentacruel's not terrible. It's actually a pretty cool spinner as far as BDSP goes. It's a cool UU spinner. It's a cool Nat Dex spinner even. Toxicroak with Rapid Spin is a pretty cool combination. I'm gonna put this below Galar Slowbro, and I'm gonna put it above Galar Slowbro, and it's mostly the fact that I think this has a lot of different tiers it's kind of viable in. Whereas Galar Slowbro really just has specifically speaking, it just has the Sword and Shield UU, and that's about it. So I think Tentacruel's consistency at being around the same level is why I'm going to put it above Galar Slowbro. It's just a more consistent version. Ariados, I can't lie, when I said the Beedrill was the worst Pokemon, I forgot this existed. It's worse than B. The only benefit it has sticky webs, but it's so terrible, and you're never going to even get them off. Crobat's up next. This is a pretty good Pokemon. It's decent in BDSP. It's decent in Sword and Shield. I'm gonna put this right above Tentacruel actually. I think the speed is really the biggest benefit here, and also it's a good anti-lead. Taunt's really nice. It's not a bad Pokemon even in BDSP OU, albeit it's not great either. It's just kind of usable. It's a cool BDSP UU Pokemon as well. I believe it is BDSP UU. I'd actually have to double check that. It's been a while since I've done BDSP low tiers. So yeah, Crobat's still BDSP UU. I could have sworn it was. But the speed is really good. It has a lot of good utility going for it. In Sword and Shield, it's the same sort of story. It's a good utility Pokemon as far as the lower tiers go. Typically, you'd see Crobat residing in the RU tier, which is honestly really good. It's pretty much just similar to Nidoking, Nidoqueen, but I do think that the difference is that unlike Nidoqueen, this has more viability in my opinion in other formats than more viability in the formats that it's competing with Nidoqueen in, besides specifically Sword and Shield RU. And I think also the fact that this is a pseudo-viable Pokemon in BDSP OU whereas I think that Nidoking is just a worse version of Nidoking in the tier, personally. Feel free to disagree on that, but it's just my personal opinion. So I'm going to put Crobat in the B tier. I'm going to put it right behind Nidoking. Actually, I'm going to put it right behind Tentacruel. I think that the Rapid Spin specifically is a really nice niche in BDSP where there's a lot less good removal options. So I'll give it that. Glowking is up next. This is definitely better than Gengar. It's probably going to be our highest A tier Pokemon besides one that I'll get into later. AV Region is really good on this. It's a really good sponge in OU. It's a really obnoxious Pokemon to actually try and KO. To put it in perspective, with an AV set, you can actually make this thing take a Nidoking hit, which is to say a lot. Considering the fact that this is such a good natural sponge, and I'll actually get you guys the exact calc right now from a modest Nidoking Life Orb hit versus Slowking Galar with Assault Vest, because I've actually had to run this calc before, and how little damage just versus the standard spread for Galar Slowking. It does 52 to 61% with modest Life Orb Earth Power with a Sheer Force boost, which is insanity to think about. And I get that, you know, this is a Spit F Slowking with an Assault Vest that's going to do that, but it's still a super effective Sheer Force Nidoking hit. And this isn't even max Spit F either. Standard only runs 120 Spit F Calm. So if we were to actually go with a max Spit F set, it's doing 47 to 56, which isn't a huge difference, but that does make the difference of potentially being a 3 KO on some rolls, which is insanity to think about. This Pokemon is an absolute behemoth, and you really do need a physical mod to actually take it out. Otherwise, you could regen up pretty easily, considering one of the better special breakers that has super effective coverage for it cannot even guarantee a 2-hit KO necessarily if it's running max. You should say a lot about how other special attackers fare. This is definitely, though, like a really good OU special pivot, and I do think that the tiering in A is very deserving. Qwilfish up next. Qwilfish is a pretty cool low tier Pokemon. I'm going to give it the C tier. I'm going to put it above Venomoth. Is one of those really good low tier spikers. I'm not necessarily sure how actually, no, I forgot this is really bad in Sword and Shield because there's a lot of different boots. It's a pretty cool Pokemon as far as BDSP goes, but I'm going to lower it because of the fact that it's not as great in Sword and Shield. It's a good Intimidate option, obviously, but I think the only thing it has benefiting is the fact that it's dual hazards and taunt is pretty cool. But typically it just isn't sought after this gen because of boots. BDSP though, it's pretty cool, considering there's no boots in that meta. But that's really the saving grace from putting it in F tier this gen, to be honest. If it was his last gen, it would be a pretty viable Pokemon. But boots kind of ruined this because a lot of different Pokemon just are no longer caring about the spikes. And most teams are caring about how to ignore hazards altogether rather than how to deal with them. So with that in mind, Qwilfish is D. Hisui and Qwilfish, I'll be honest, this is definitely an F tier Pokemon right now. The one saving grace this has is the fact that it can run a Violate, which I'm going to put this at the top of F, only off of the fact this will get a better moveset, but currently this actually does lack a lot of different moves in general. To put it in perspective, if we were to look at what this mod actually does get, for example, in the current Radical Red state, Qwilfish Hisuian form, this thing gets no physical Dark Stab. Its only poison type stab would be Poison Jab, Barb Barrage, which we don't know how that's going to be interpreted, and Poison Sting. This only has regular spikes currently. It doesn't have toxic spikes, which it will probably get those, to be fair. Again, these are moves that it will probably get. It currently lacks Taunt. It currently lacks Haze. It currently lacks a lot of Qwilfish utility, which it will probably get through Egg moves. But I cannot guarantee that. The saving grace, though, is the fact that it still has a Violate, and it still has Intimidate and Poison Point, which are both pretty cool. And it still has regular spikes, which is at least not terrible. And you can run a mix set on this, actually. It's not horrible. It's not great. It's not great. But the point being is you can make this a not terrible Intimidate and Pivot with regular spikes. It's a typing that only has one weakness. So I'll give it F tier off of that premise. But I will say, though, is that when this does get introduced in a mainline game, it will probably end up rising to like a C tier category, in my opinion. But I cannot just make that assumption when it has so little to give me right now. Next up, though, we have Hisui and Sneasel. And Hisui and Sneasel, actually, I do think, on the other hand, has a pretty decent moveset. With Poison, Fighting, and Ghost, this actually has all it needs to hit everything neutrally, like every Pokemon neutrally. And it also has other coverage options, too. It's got Sword Stance. It's got decent stats. It's basically Sneasel stats. So I'm actually going to give this thing a C tier. I'm going to put it right below Venomoth, personally. I do think that the Poison Fighting typing is really good, and this will probably reside itself as a really not bad RU option. It's a fighting type that can kill fairies off a stab alone, and the calcs are not terrible. You can probably run this thing with Band or Life Orb, and I think that will be what its niche is. It's pretty comparable to Toxicroak, actually, except for Toxicroak can run special sets, so I think alone will be something going for it. If only this hasn't got like Mach Punch, that would honestly probably propel it to like the top of C, because that priority alone would be amazing on it. But it still has Drain Punch at least, which is pretty cool if you don't want to go for necessarily just the breaking with close combat. So yeah, I think it's a cool Pokemon. D tier, this was the Pokemon that when I took back on Ariados as the worst poison, this was the one I actually meant. Terrible. Actually, no. Venomoth Venomoth has one thing going for it, and it's the fact that it does Quiver plus Moonlight, which is not Venomoth. Dustox has one thing going for it, which is Compound Eyes plus Moonlight, Quiver Dance, and then just other stuff. I mean, it's not a great Pokemon, but I can at least think of a set this could run in low tiers. Beedrill and Ariados are terrible. They're absolutely terrible. This at least has something going for it, being Quiver. And Quiver objectively does make this somewhat usable with Bug Buzz plus Sludge Bomb. It's not horrible. Just not good. Don't use Venomoth. I know, don't use Dustox. Roselia, on the other hand, it's a pretty good low tier Pokemon. When I think of low tier spikers, I'm thinking of Roselia. For example, Roselia obviously having the access to dual spikes, unlike Hisui and Qwilfish. This also has a Violet, which could be a pretty good PU sponge in my personal opinion. I know it's not even tiered right now, but I do think this actually does have a place unlike the other Pokemon in this tier. Really, I think the one thing that is the biggest detriment right now is the fact that, again, it's a hazard avoiding meta, but I think it's just worse Qwilfish personally. So I want to tier it like that, albeit this does have a case for F for sure. But I do think along the Violet plus Recovery plus Dual Spikes, while it's not necessarily a tiered Pokemon, it could actually be viable in like a PU setting, in my personal opinion. And there's been metas where it has been. It just, I know it's not super like broken right now. So what's up next? F tier Pokemon. I'm gonna put it right behind Arbok though, because this has a lot of good coverage. But man, Swalot just has like nothing really great stat wise going for it. But it has a lot of good coverage. It has some good utility actually, with stuff like Pain Split, Yawn, Encore, Destiny Bond. It has a lot of weird options, to be honest. So I want to at least, you know, give it acknowledgement where it's due. Seviper, in my opinion, actually, Seviper is just a worse version of Arbok, because of the fact that Arbok has one thing going for it, being Intimidate. I think otherwise this is literally just like basically comparable. It's a Pokemon that really should have been Dark Poison, and if it was Dark Poison, this could honestly probably have merit for like a D, C tier. But yeah, Seviper's is not great. It has basically the same utility as Arbok, just it is worse. Though I will say one thing going for it is the fact this does have Sucker Punch, which is actually a pretty nice distinction, and it's also a little more viable specially. However, I think Intimidate is the real big killer that Seviper doesn't have, but Arbok does. And I think that alone is really the reason, quote unquote, you would use Arbok to begin with. Roserai's up next. Pretty good BDSP Pokemon actually. It's not terrible in low tiers either. I'm going to put this in B tier. I'm going to put it above Nidoking. Actually, I'm going to put it below Nidoking, because just like Nidoking, this is a kind of niche, well, it's a usable BDSP Pokemon, but it's no meta definer, and it's still a pretty good low tier Pokemon as well. And I think it's basically as comparable to Nidoking as I can give it, as I can really give any Pokemon for that matter. So I'm going to do that. Next up is Golbat. We did forget to put Golbat on earlier. I've mostly sorted these by dex order, but I kind of skipped over Golbat. Golbat's a Pokemon that's definitely fallen off a lot this generation. However, it's still not terrible to Violet. I'm going to put this thing, where is Golbat right now actually? It's still an NFE Pokemon. I'm going to put this right above, I'm going to put it right below Roselia. Golbat still has a lot going for it, and I think they're pretty comparable as far as Roselia and Golbat versus Roserade and Crobat, with Roserade being just slightly more viable, just like Roselia is. Golbat does have a few things going for it though, with Violet, with honestly a pretty hard type in KO. Typically in low tiers, you're going to find a lot of Pokemon won't necessarily be able to OHKOs the Violet, because they're going to lack the really strong offense. However, I think that Golbat's biggest kicker is that it has really bad form Musat syndrome, which is why a lot of people have fallen out of these of Violet Pokemon that are hard to kill, because they're also hard to run a lot of moves on. So I think it's the biggest kicker for Golbat, but it's still not a bad Pokemon. I just don't think it's really that incredible anymore. So we're going to go into Skuntank next. Skuntank's pretty interesting. This is a Pokemon that typically ends up, again, not really getting tiered that well. However, I think that similarly to what I said for the Galar, for the Hisui and Qwilfish, Dark Poison typing saves this. Well, actually, no, I said it for the Seviper. Dark Poison typing saves it. I'm going to put it above the Violet Mon, because the priority, and I know this is like when ZU was tier, it was a pretty decent Pokemon. I mean, it still is PU niche if I remember correctly. We'll give it D tier. Drapion's up next. Drapion's a pretty good Pokemon, actually. This is a not terrible Pokemon as far as low tiers go. It's a not terrible Pokemon as far as BDSP goes. I'm going to give this like the bottom of C tier, mostly just because I think that C tier is looking a little shallow right now. I know it's a pretty typical Pokemon that will be running NU. It's sometimes even running very rare occasions, if I remember correctly, in RU. It has a lot going for it with stuff like T-Spike sets. It's not a bad banded option. It's a pretty cool, just bulky option with Black Sludge in general. The point being is that Drapion has a lot going for it. It's a Swiss Army knife as far as low tiers go, and the typing is really hard to kill. Next up is Toxicroak. Toxicroak, I can't lie, I think Toxicroak's biggest kicker is the fact that it has like no speed. If it said Hisui and Sneasel speed, this would honestly be top of C, maybe even low B if it kept its offenses, but it doesn't. I'm going to put this thing right below his, actually no, I'm going to put this right below Drapion. The fact that this can run Mix is really the biggest saving grace here, because it does have a lot of good coverage at both ends. It's just too slow, sadly, to pull it off typically. Arceus Poison. Arceus Poison, I'm going to give the S tier category. It's an Arceus that can't get poisoned, which, if this wasn't BSP or if this was in Sword and Shield specifically, this would actually say a lot, because a not poisoned Arceus is amazing, considering Refresh was actually cut. However, Arceus is not in Sword and Shield. You're running this thing typically in Nat decks, where Refresh is still fine. So it lost that niche for sure. Poison's still not a bad typing though. You can get rid of T-Spikes, but there's not a lot of prevalent T-Spikers. It's really just Pex, which is kind of niche, and then it's just a turn, and that's really it. Maybe the 1 in a million Tentacruel, I guess, that people might still run because they're at rank 1000 and running Rapid Spin plus T-Spikes, but that's really an archaic relic at this point. Tentacruel's not really used anymore in Ubers like it used to be. But I mean, it's not terrible in BDSP, I guess, where Refresh is cut, but I still wouldn't really recommend Arceus Poison even in that tier where Refresh is cut. I think Arceus Poison is just a Pokemon that exists. It's not bad by any sense. It's definitely better than something like a Fire Arceus, for example. So I'll give it S. I'll give it S for sure. It still is an Arceus. Scoliped's up next. Scoliped's a Pokemon that's been, to say the least, it's similar to stuff like Roserade, for example, and Venomoth, where it's lost a lot of viability. I'm going to put this above Venomoth, though, because I think that it's easier to snowball with Scolipede with something like a Swords Dance set than it would be with Venomoth, especially because you can boost your offenses quicker, and with Protect, you can enable the speed to pile up really quickly, and it does have a lot of... It's a better spiker than Venomoth, I should say. It's better in that utility aspect. It's naturally faster. It's naturally also just more offensive, and I think that the speed boost is a better snowball than Quiver Dance would be on Tin and Lens. Gmax Garbodor, I'm putting this in the bottom of D tier, and it's only because of the fact this is a Gmax Pokemon, and I don't want to put it in F tier, but it's not great. It's pretty terrible. Gmax Garbodor's max move is pretty... It's really just not usable in my personal opinion, because it's basically just like T-Spikes, but you'd rather use the fact that this is going to end up being a poison type specially boosting move, and Garbodor is also just a really wasted Gmax in my personal opinion. So in my opinion, this is a pretty terrible Gmax. Garbodor, on the other hand, I do actually think Garbodor is pretty good. This is a Pokemon that typically is like one of the better PU Pokemon. I'm going to put it above Qwilfish because I put Qwilfish here as like one of those not tiered Pokemon. Well, the very, very low tiered PU Pokemon. So I think Garbodor, if I put Qwilfish here, I have to put Garbodor at least ahead of it, because it's just a better version of Qwilfish's gen, because Garbodor doesn't really need to run stuff like Intimidate. And also just, I think the fact that stuff like, for example, just, I don't know, I feel like just the fact that it's more offensively potent, and it has slightly better Spadef, which is pretty good as far as low tiers go, and taking advantage of the poison typing. This also has a lot of better offensive coverage options, which is great because it's not just limited to support Pokemon like Qwilfish is, because its coverage isn't that great. So I'll give Garbodor that. It's just a better Qwilfish gen in my opinion. Amoonguss, I'm going to put in the bottom of A tier, and it's mostly just because of the fact that despite not being some meta definer in like OU or anything, and it's not even some terrifying Pokemon in UU either. It's a really good VGC Pokemon this generation. It's a great Kyogre check, and Spore is amazing, especially with Rage Powder as well. It's one of the better grass supports you can get in my personal opinion, and it's one of those Pokemon you can actually pretty easily fit on teams, even now where VGC meta is going with like Legendary Gung Ho, because it's a really good Kyogre check. So with that in mind, I gotta give Amoonguss the A tier. I think it would be a crime not to, in my opinion. Next up though, we do have Dragalge. Dragalge is a pretty interesting one. I'll be honest, I'm going to give this thing a C tier. I think that adaptability alone makes this thing really good. I'm going to put it above Drapion, just because this fact was, at least this was banned from Sword and Shield NU. That's really all I can give it though. I think it's, actually I'm going to put it above Venusaur and Sneasel too, just because I think that this has more than just the offenses, which Sneasel really only is an offensive Pokemon. And Dragalge at the very least also is a really good support Pokemon with T-Spikes. Next up though, we have Mareanie. Mareanie is one of those Pokemon that I did want to mention just because it's an Violet Pokemon, and I think that it's at the very least like kind of usable in low tiers. As far as an LC Pokemon goes, this has a Violet, it's regen, it's, as far as low tier, it's like pseudo bulky, but it's just a worse version of the Roselia and the Golbat and all that sort of stuff, where I think those Pokemon benefit more because they have better offenses as well to support with their Violets. But Mareanie having regen is at least something worth noting, and I figured at least it's better than stuff like Buxy. I'm gonna put it below Viper, I think, at least, because I think these Pokemon at the very least aren't like specifically item locked, which is a good benefit for them. Mareanie pretty much is. Pex though, Pex is top of A tier. I think you could make a case for bottom of S as well. Pex having regen, and it's honestly a really obnoxious Pokemon I kill. In fact, in Natics this was even suspected, and it's honestly a custom S Pokemon anyway. I'm gonna put this in S because it's a typical Pokemon that you'll see top of the usage, top 10 in pretty much any OU it's allowed in. It's a Pokemon that's borderline cusp viability for S tier. It got suspected in that dex. I think taking away this thing's S tier on this tier list would be pretty much a big crime personally. So I'm gonna put this thing in the S tier right now. Salazzle on the other hand, Salazzle's not a bad Pokemon, and something I did actually forget to mention, and someone pointed this out to me in the comments of my fire type tier list, I really appreciated it. This can also actually poison types, which I did forget about actually, and I forgot to mention that. It doesn't change the tier I would put it in, however, I would have probably bumped it up a little bit in the tiering. As far as poisons go though, this is definitely a C tier poison. I'm gonna put it above Dragalge, I'll be honest. I think the fact that it's a poison type that can hit steals really well, as far as poison viability goes, is really good. Well, no, Dragalge can still hit them. It still has good coverage. It's still obnoxious to switch it on. I'm gonna definitely put it above Hisuian Sneasel though, Drapion, etc. The support this has is really amazing, and it's a really good fast Pokemon. It's offensively pretty potent. I think that C is a pretty deserving tier as far as poison types go. Poison type Silvally, I think this is poison. If it's not, oops. It's pretty not great poison type. However, it's at least like kind of usable. I won't act like this is some amazing poison type or anything, but just the fact that it's a low tier poison is with a good all around bulk is pretty nice. Qwilfish is at least is a good support. I'm gonna put it below Qwilfish. Final answer. It's at least not bad. It's good momentum poison, which a lot of poisons don't have a lot of good momentum. Barring stuff like Tox and Crobat and B, there's not a lot to have great pivot. So I'll give it that. It's something. Nihilego is a pretty solid Pokemon. I'm gonna give this the new bottom of A. This is another VGC viable poison that's sitting in the UU tier and has some niche OU potential with something Meteor Beam. This is definitely not a great OU Pokemon. This is like maybe a C- D tier Pokemon at best, but it's still something at the very least. In fact, maybe it's a little higher actually. I forget where this is ranked. Actually, now that I think about it, this does actually have a sample team it was viable on if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's actually a B Pokemon. Huh, would you look at that? I forgot about that. I forgot this actually had like a team that it was literally ran on. I'm gonna put it above Gengar because at least it's like kind of viable, whereas Gengar is not really that great right now. But yeah, Nihilego is a pretty cool Trick Room setter in VGC as well. As I said, it's literally on an OU sample team with like a bunch of Beast Boost spam to put in perspective. Which, let me see if that team's actually still here. Because it was a really fun team actually. It was ran with like Selly, Cart, and then Nihilego. Sadly, it doesn't look like the team is still here anymore. But I remember running it a couple months back, and it was a pretty fun team. Nihilego was a demon on the team with Meteor Beam, and you could really just overwhelm teams a lot with the Beast Boost spam. It's got some cool hazard options if you want to run the hazard route instead with T-Spikes and Rocks. It's got some good speed, outpacing a lot of different common threats like Victini and Garchomp. So I gotta give Nihilego that. It's a pretty good Pokemon in my opinion. Naganadel is one of those Pokemon that I think could borderline either like high A or S. Ultimately though, I think I'm gonna put it in S because of the fact that this is a pretty cool Scarfer, and also it's one of those few T-Spikers as far as Ubers go. It's literally just like Gren, Pex, Naga, a turn. If we're gonna get like technical because of Pokemon that are banned, including the Nat Dex tiering of course, it's really all that actually do exist in the tier as far as T-Spikers in general. So I'm gonna give Naga that. It's at least something in its wheelhouse, and it's a pretty cool Scarfer, outpacing a lot of different dragons if you really wanted to go that route. It's a cool Life Orb Mon. You could definitely snowball a lot of teams with plot sets, so I'll give Naga that. Next up is Gmax Tox. This is the one Gmax I will actually make an exception for. No, I lie. I'm gonna put it right above Garbodor, but it's still really terrible. Tox, on the other hand, I'm gonna put this. I think I'm gonna put it right above Salazzle, I want to say. Tox is a pretty weird one. Toxtricity is a pretty viable Pokemon. No, I'm gonna put it right here. I will say I think the one thing I'm gonna give it is the fact that this is a pretty cool breaker. It's basically like Exploud as far as breaking goes, but Punk Rock is really an amazing ability. And Spec sets, Scarf sets, Shift Gear sets, they're all pretty viable in this Pokemon, and you can even see it occasionally in OU, and I think that alone does actually give it some merit. However, to be fair, I'm pretty sure its OU phase is over just because of the fact that it's not really as potent and Shift Gear sets can't pop as easily anymore. It's still not bad in UU, it's still not bad in RU, it's pretty good in those tiers, and I think at least above something like a Scully, for example, or like a Venomoth is pretty deserving. A turn, S+, this is literally the second best poison in the game. T-Spikes is amazing on this. It's a 130 dragon, which outpaces a lot of other dragons. It has reliable recovery and recovery too, which is literally like one of the best recovery moves you have. It's no drawback. You're not affected by weathers. This is a demon. Sneasler, I think I'm going to put this in the bottom of A tier. It's just better. Well, it's a better Hisuian Sneasel. Sneasler's one benefit is the fact that it does have the really strong offensive for 130 and 120 speed. It's another Glass Cannon Pokemon, and similar to Weezing and Sneasel, it has perfect coverage for everything neutrally. I think that if this gets knockoff, you might see this have a case for a really high A tier, but I think it's definitely objectively better than a lot of the B tiers. Finally, we have Overqwil. Similar to Weezing and Sneasel, and Weezing and Qwilfish, Overqwil does have a lot going for it as far as typing goes. However, this also does lose a lot of stuff. For right now, I'm going to put this in the F tier just because of the fact that I think personally a Violet Qwilfish is actually a little bit better. You don't really get a physical dark move on this, and it's more so physically leaning than even the Weezing and Qwilfish was before with the 115 offense. And I think that really the biggest detriment is this can't hold a Violet. Weezing and Qwilfish can, but I do think that both of these will end up going with C tier, again, pretty similar to each other as far as tiering goes, when it does get its other egg moves from stuff like Qwilfish. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the poison tier list. If you did, leave a like below and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.